Kenny Kunene, I don't take as a very serious person with whom to engage on these issues. We must be clear, we communicated this week in a unambiguous fashion that he has failed in every single metric of the way boycott could well be the final nail in the coffin. And while it's tried to kind of say, this is the best idea.
Well, we've just had a couple of quiet weeks in South African politics, or so it felt, and suddenly all hell has broken loose, and it seems like everybody is up to stuff. And we know what's happening on a national scale with some deputy ministers getting fired, but on a local level, there have been changes as well. There was a motion of no confidence in the Johannesburg mayor, which was unsuccessful, and the chief whip. But a motion of no confidence against the Speaker in the House of Johannesburg that was successful, and that Speaker didn't belong to the ANC, but in fact was there as part of a deal with Action SA. And joining us today to explain what on earth is going on is Michael Beaumont, Chairman of Action SA. Welcome, Michael. Welcome back.
Thank you very much. You say it's been a quiet couple of weeks. It hasn't felt like it to me, and I reckon quiet week in South African politics is a pretty big week anywhere else in the world, isn't it?
Yeah, it just felt like we had got into a calm but useless stage, but clearly stuff was was happening in the background. But let's start off before we get on to some of the bigger issues. Certainly at the local level, your Speaker Nobuhle Ntembu in the city of Johannesburg was voted out in a motion of no confidence. But the way I understand it, and correct me if I'm wrong, this was part of a whole deal which ultimately led to you having the mayoralty in the city of Tshwane. But are the two issues linked, or can we talk about Joburg in isolation and then move on to the city of Tshwane?
Yeah, please do talk about it in isolation, because we were very clear when we set up these arrangements that Action SA will never want to see a situation where instability in one municipality is visited upon the residents of another. We made that one of our number one conditions in these negotiations, and they were universally accepted by everyone. And I'm quite glad to say that even in the engagements that have been taking place this week in the city of Tshwane around councils and other things, it's been productive, it's been constructive. There's been nothing about Johannesburg infiltrating the politics in Tshwane.
Yeah, I think my advice is stick around, but anyway.
No, it is, but I guess there's a couple of things there. I mean, firstly, we have agreed to this principle, and it was an important principle for us because you'll remember when we first entered these arrangements, we did so because, in part, the removal of the EFF caucus leader Nkuruleni Dunga had resulted in votes being stalemated in the city of Johannesburg to the detriment of residents. And from our point of view, that wasn't a healthy situation, and our voting bloc in Johannesburg was a useful way of not entering in coalition, because we most certainly didn't do that, but rather to provide our votes on an issue-by-issue basis to ensure that no party can hold government to ransom in that kind of unhealthy manner. And in exchange, we could serve in the legislature and hold that government to account. Now, I guess there's an interesting discussion about the extent to which that has taken place, which I would welcome. But
and boy, it's coming, yes.
Yeah, well, let's go.
Yeah, like you say that you're going to vote on an issue-by-issue basis. Of course, the biggest issue in the city of Johannesburg has been the performance of our Mayor Marero, and what has been Action SA's assessment of his job so far.
Well, I mean, we must be clear. We communicated this week in a unambiguous fashion that he has failed in every single metric of the way. Bear with me, Mike, because you've asked a loaded question.
Yes.
And we haven't, minced our words in that regard.
But you minced your vote.
Well,
because you didn't vote for the motion of no confidence, you abstained.
Yeah, and if you give me a moment, I'll give you the answer as well. But the critical point for us is that we decided that we could not vote against the motion to defend Dada Marero, precisely because of his track record in leading the city of Johannesburg has been so poor, and the governance issues in Johannesburg are so many. But at the same time, we have a principled position as a party that we cannot support a motion of no confidence unless we are aware of what the governing alternative is that is being proposed by the party bringing the motion of no confidence. And in this regard, the Democratic Alliance did not communicate with any other party in the council as to what governing arrangement they would put in place that A, would have a majority, firstly for the motion to succeed, and secondly for an alternative government to be stable, but secondly how the government would actually be able to fix many of the issues that are frustrating Joburg residents. And I think what you can see from that is that their motion of no confidence wasn't a viable and genuine effort to remove a mayor and put in place a better government. Had that been the case, they would have undoubtedly received our support. But it was a gimmick that didn't receive many more votes than their own councillors because it was never intended to in the first place. I want to make this point as well,
sorry,
Marcus.
this always goes back to the DA, does it?
Well, if they bring the motions...
I mean, the way I see it, the city's being wrecked by a mayor that you had a hand in putting in that in the seat.
Well, actually, no. The GLU governing arrangement has a majority without Action SA's support, and hence why they could defeat the motion despite our abstaining in the first instance. But the bigger point to make here, Mike, is that the ANC is in government in Johannesburg with that GLU, because as you know, and I know you know because I've spoken with you about this on countless occasions, the Democratic Alliance has collapsed no fewer than 4 efforts to restore a majority under its former coalition led by its own Mpopalatse. In the last instance, as you will recall, it was Action SA that gave up 2 of our 3 MMCs in Johannesburg, so 2/3 of our leadership in Johannesburg, to accommodate the Patriotic Alliance that would restore a majority behind Mpopalatse. We did that. Every party shook hands. Gayton McKenzie publicly announced the deal, and the DA nationally shot that down over the wishes of their local structures. So when people say Dada Marrero governs because of any other reason other than the fact that the Democratic Alliance has chosen not to, it's just patently incorrect. The reason I mentioned the DA in my explanation is that Johannesburg residents are being failed by the 2 largest parties in the council, without any question, because again, the ANC has given us Dada Marrero, and as I've spoken in the beginning of this interview, he is an unmitigated failure. And let's unpack that more in detail because there's plenty to say there. But at the same time, the second biggest party has opted not to lead at every single instance. And I'm at pains to point out that this motion of no confidence was more evidence of that.
What do you play of the role? You mentioned the Patriotic Alliance and Gayton McKenzie. They hold the deputy mayoralty. Now, you had the deputy mayoralty in the city of Tshwane, which gave you an insight into the shortcomings of Mayor Celia Brink at the time. That's why you had him removed, right? What do you think of the Patriotic Alliance holding their deputy mayoralty in the city of Johannesburg and being, on the face of it, very comfortable in this arrangement?
Well, I mean, the Patriotic Alliance is a party that I have criticized on many occasions for the variety of reasons that they offer in that regard. And Kenny Kunene, I don't take as a very serious person with whom to engage on these issues. But the nature of South African politics is such that you have to work with people who you might not regard to be optimal. What I find problematic about the approach that the DA has taken towards the PA is it seems to be framed all about what they are willing to do, who they are willing to work with, and who they are willing to trust, without regard for what the city of Johannesburg residents are willing to endure, because their lack of trust for the PA is now translated into a government that not just includes the PA now, but also the ANC, the EFF, and everybody else. So it seems like a conversation centered around what parties are willing to do and not what residents should have.
Yeah.
I think a government that involves the PA, the DA, Action SA, and everyone else surely must be a hell of a lot better than a government involving the ANC, the EFF, and the PA, etc.
I mean, I'm just wondering if the DA hasn't been vindicated by the very poor performance of the Patriotic Alliance in the city of Johannesburg.
Well, I mean...
Do you know what I mean? I'm saying, because that cuts both ways. You're saying they're the ones that scuppered the deal by not giving them more seats, whereas now they've got all the seats they want, and they're doing nothing with it. The city continues to deteriorate. So therefore, perhaps the DA was making the right call, and it was you guys that weren't being so very clever about it.
I think it's a ridiculous argument because, in other words, what you're saying is that the DA proved that the PA is unreliable. Well, I mean, you've just proven something as obvious as gravity.
Yeah, but you were prepared to give away your seats to have that unreliable party.
We were willing to make a sacrifice to ensure a better governing coalition.
How would it have been better if they were?
Because it would involve a group of political parties that have demonstrably governed Johannesburg better than this group of political parties has. So I'm not a big fan of Mpopalatse. I think there were many things that were deficient about her leadership. But in that coalition in which she was governing, things were moving a bit better than they are right now. So it's quite straightforward, actually, to say that the decision to let that government collapse and this government continue, I mean, you might regard that to be a vindication of the DA's decision. Should the city of Johannesburg residents be paying for that vindication in the manner that they have? Is this going to be like the "I told you so" kind of thing while people are suffering from failed delivery? I think that would be a pretty poor taste of the DA to kind of say "we told you so" in that kind of manner.
Well, look, I mean, this one can go around in circles, and we've done that enough. But now, tell me about the removal of your speaker. Why?
Well,
it seems like they were unhappy that she was asking too many questions or not allowing some of the malfeasance just to happen in the open.
Look, it's definitely a big part of it. When we entered this arrangement, we didn't enter as coalition partners. We entered in the legislature, voting on an issue-by-issue basis. And what very clearly unfolded in the last 8 months is that when serious issues of governance would come up, Action SA was quite different to the other parties working with the ANC, because I think they really just get along to go along, whereas Action SA would actually pose serious challenges about what we are seeing. So when we see a failure to appoint a city manager, but just a continuous and unlawful reinstating of acting arrangements by questionable characters, and we voted against those in council, that was seen to be an act of disloyalty. When we voted against the tariff increases in the budget, similar story. And I get the sense that what the ANC is looking for in Johannesburg is, lapdogs that will simply help them do whatever they want to do, regardless of whether it's the right or the wrong thing, and people who can cheerlead their failures. Action SA has never been built in that mold, whether we're dealing with the ANC or the DA. We've always had a particular view on governance issues, and we've represented them quite strongly and quite consistently. And I think that skin wore very thin for them, in the sense that they were tired of being questioned and voted against. And when it came to the issue of the motion of no confidence, we sat down the ANC before the council meeting, and we said, we've deliberated on this issue, and there's absolutely no way we can vote to defend this mayor. For them, that was seen to be an act of disloyalty. When we communicated that, we knew that that would invariably mean that they would either fold their hands and abstain on the motion against our speaker, or even vote for it, which they ended up doing. And that was a decision we took, was a sacrifice we'd be willing to make, because at the end of the day, we would not be the party that would defend the indefensible in order to retain a position. And that's why I find a lot of the criticisms thrown at Action SA's way in the wake of this council meeting quite ironic, because while some parties are rolling out gimmicks, we sacrificed a position on principle, and we stand by that without any apology.
Yeah, well, one could say that the DA sacrificed the position of mayor on principle, but yet you're castigating them for doing a bigger version of what you do.
I think the joke is about whose principle are we talking about here, because the principle we're talking about is the residents of Johannesburg, and the fact that we don't think that they should be led by a failed mayor. The DA's principle appears to not be about the residents of Johannesburg, and appears to be about what they are willing to do individually as leaders of a party. And again, I just don't think that's resident-centric thinking.
So as a resident of the city of Johannesburg, in what way did your working with the ANC help me?
Well, I mean, there was a huge amount of oversight that we were effecting from the legislature. Our speaker and our team, by virtue of her role there, have been involved in exposing a lot relating to these acting arrangements of senior managers and opposing that, to going on the ground to major capital projects like we have in the Bree Street area where that gas explosion took place, and exposing how contracts are not delivering on budget and on time, etc. And we use the position very strongly to ensure that we can drive accountability in that kind of manner. But I think the point we were always at pains to observe in the beginning, which I suppose we could never have imagined the depth of it there at that early point, is that you can't fix service delivery from the legislature. Service delivery is driven in the executive, and oversight is only as helpful as the extent to which you have an executive that can be held accountable and is willing to be held accountable. In the city of Johannesburg, I think Dada Marero and his government have demonstrated that they don't have an interest in that regard.
And to be fair to him, he said that.
Well, he said a number of things.
Yeah.
I mean, aside from the famous, don't expect much from me, and then, you'll be fine as long as you're on a G20 route. Even in the approach to this council meeting, when we conveyed our position to the ANC, we were astonished when he turned around to us and says, I don't know what you're talking about. We think service delivery is actually going really well in Johannesburg. And I mean, there was this kind of like stunned silence in the room where you were kind of looking around to see if you were getting punked or something. Because you just can't imagine what Johannesburg he would be referring to. Mm. I think the challenge here is that if you have someone who is not just failing in their leadership of a city, but is deluded in their failure of leadership, then you've got a serious problem on your hands. Mm.
Now, we, without sort of going into too much detail, because I think we've got more interesting things to discuss, you have the position of mayor, and Nasipi Moyo is doing a hell of a job in the city of Tshwane, but you do that at the pleasure of the ANC. Do you think what's happened in Johannesburg will have a knock-on effect? You're pretty confident that it's two totally different issues and they will abide by the arrangement?
Let's just address the narrative firstly. I mean, when you work in a coalition, you work at the pleasure of your coalition partners, and they with you. I think it's quite important to remember that that government wouldn't exist without Action SA either. So in a narrow environment of a majority coalition like that, the point is you are dependent upon one another to govern. What's different about Johannesburg, about Tshwane, and I'm always at pains to observe that in local government, the quality of leadership you have in an individual area matters. So you can have a similar group of parties in one place not performing well, and another place performing really well. And it speaks about the depth of leadership you have in the individuals there. And in Tshwane, there is a good team of people who are working well together. There appears to be a focus on the right things, on service delivery. And there is a turnaround that is taking place in that environment, admittedly, with an absolute mountain to climb. Because I think the moment anyone kind of says we've arrived or, we've turned it around, they're also delusional. And we have to stay away from deluded politics. But there doesn't appear to be any blowback in the city of Tshwane in respect of our decisions in Johannesburg, which is precisely why we negotiated a coalition arrangement in Tshwane that said Joburg is Joburg, Tshwane is Tshwane, and let never the two shall meet in respect of governance issues. And in that regard, I think the partners appear to be respecting those divisions of labor and the responsibilities. And the city is continuing to the work of the turnaround that it began.
Yeah. Now, when we look at these at the city of Johannesburg, yet more money, yet another loan being taken, another 2 billion. City now pays 27 million rand a month in interest. Surely it's unsustainable.
Yeah, it certainly is looking like it's going that way. I happened across a senior member of the city the other day who confided in me that the revenue collection rate in the city is now down to 81%. Now, I mean, 81% might sound like a distinction in the eyes of most people. But I mean, when we were governing in Johannesburg, the collection rate was at 95 or 96. And each percentage is a few hundred million rand in revenue. So a drop of that kind of magnitude means that the financial viability of the city is in a serious question. I've never heard of the figure being that low before. And I suppose precisely why you would have loan agreements like that coming to council and not to fund capital projects which have a clear financial return on investment that would make sense from a loan point of view. You can understand a loan in that environment. I mean, these are loans just to fund the running of the city and to fill the gap that is now being left by inefficiencies in the revenue environment, which is being run by a party called the ARC, a person who has absolutely no experience in finance whatsoever.
That's why she's there.
Well, without being funny, that's precisely what the mayor said when engaged on the topic, because, I mean, I can control her. From our point of view, this is a large part of the misgovernance that's taking place in the city of Joburg now.
Yeah, and, from a political point of view, I know that we cannot ever mention the words rates boycott, because everybody then starts looking for drones above your house. But is it feasible in a city like Johannesburg? I mean, ratepayers that are paying rates are not, opening the taps and nothing runs through. From where you sit, how much more should the ratepayers be expected to take?
Well, it's hard to say, because there's obviously been a lot of abuse meted out to the ratepayers of Johannesburg. But at the end of the day, as a representative of a party that's in the council, I don't think a rates boycott is the answer.
I think it's the exact answer.
Well, you may, but the question comes as to what happens to the institutions of the city of Johannesburg under that kind of environment. And what will basically happen is the institutions will be damaged to the point that they will be beyond repair. And while it might be...
Are you saying they're not beyond repair now?
I guess there's degrees of not beyond repair, aren't there? And I suppose if you look at the state of Johannesburg and the condition that it's in, a rates boycott could well be the final nail in the coffin. And while it's tried to kind of say, this is the best idea ever, the question becomes at what expense? Because a rates boycott isn't going to fix city power. Residents can't club together and create their own city power. They can't go ahead and create their own Joburg water. And the problems of Johannesburg are so significant from a major infrastructure point of view that it's going to require serious intervention to solve those problems that a race boycott simply isn't going to accomplish from my point of view.
Well, I mean, I must admit, I was focused quite closely on the council meeting in question where all these no confidence votes were being held. And I didn't hear one person at that in the entire process talk about the ratepayers. I heard them only talk about politics, politicians, political parties, and the poor, but not on ratepayers.
I don't know whose speeches you were listening to. I listened to a number of them from the Action SA councillors, and I think their speeches were loaded with references to kind of resident-centric thinking that's going to be needed in our city. And the fact that, what you have going on is the two largest parties that are playing political games in their own self-interest at the expense of what is needed by the residents of Johannesburg. So I don't know which council meeting you're listening to, but the one I was listening to, they had plenty to say in that regard.
Now, obviously, people are going to draw conclusions, and we're heading towards local government election. What is your sense? Are people happy to vote for the parties in a similar way to the way they voted in the last election? Or do you see big changes coming from the city of Johannesburg?
No, I see massive changes coming at local government generally and in Johannesburg specifically. I think firstly, more and more, I think there's an appreciation of the difference between national, provincial and local elections. I think before those things were all kind of blurred a little bit and people didn't discern between the differences there. But I think the nature of the failures of local government is there's been an increasing level of attention on these particular issues. And I think already there is going to be some retributive kind of voting patterns already. And as it relates to the patterns of support, I do see a scenario where the ANC and the current group that is coalescing in Johannesburg are going to fall far beyond, be below a majority. And the real question is whether the group of parties on the other side are going to be able to pull together a majority.
And where do you put yourself in that discussion? Because you've been on the ANC side now, so where do you put yourselves? Or do you see yourselves being sort of politically flexible?
Well, I think we've taken the conscious decision after May last year because, as you know, Mark, we were a party that had attached ourselves at the hips very firmly to the DA and a group of parties in that ecosystem. And it cost us dearly in the last election because those associations can be toxic in many communities across our country. And in addition to that, you have places like Tshwane where the DA was patently misgoverning. And I think evidence of that is now becoming, objective in asserting that fact. So we've taken a view to say we actually need to make a decision on the merits of the decision at hand and look at where the best governing arrangement can be put in place. I think what the ANC in Johannesburg is revealing is that they are incapable of being the best option from a governing majority point of view. And that creates a very dangerous scenario because the DA is proven unwilling to govern. The ANC is proving incapable of governing. And that's creating the stalemate where a huge chunk of votes is being locked up in two political parties that are either incapable or unwilling to govern in Johannesburg. And that's why I think more and more that understanding is going to change the alignment of votes in Johannesburg in a very big way. I'm also very glad to see that there's going to be a focus of Joburg mayoral candidates because I think that's a good thing. I think we need to raise the bar. And quite frankly, I think you can slither over the Dada Marrero bar. And if we're going to be talking about some candidates that up the ante in a Johannesburg point of view, I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, I want to get on to those candidates in a minute. I just want to one of the things about the city of Tshwane that I was quite surprised to see is one of the reasons given for taking the steps that you took in replacing the previous management in the city of Tshwane was that you didn't like the fact that they had imposed legal action against unions who had challenged their decision not to impose increases. But yet you've continued with that case.
It wasn't the reason we imposed, by the way. Sorry, just wanted to make sure that my words are attributed correctly. Our view was the handling of that unprotected strike in the city of Tshwane was disastrous. It had resulted in about 4 months during which service delivery was on its knees in the city. And we think that the approach taken by the mayor at the time was firstly the wrong approach from that point of view, because the city was not blameless in the conditions that caused that strike. To be specific, and I mean, again, we must ground these things in fact and reason, is over 3 financial years, the city had reneged on the labor collective agreement, the bargaining agreements on annual increases for employees in the city for 2 of the 3 years.
But the courts found in their favour.
Correct. But for 2 of the 3 years, they had reneged on that agreement. Now, those agreements are binding, they are important, but there was an important distinction about what the city could afford at the time because of the financial distress that they were in.
Right.
Now, in an environment like that where you are legally obliged to fulfill a commitment, but you're also legally obliged to manage the finances of a city in a responsible manner, the correct approach is to bring people around a table and to negotiate a solution.
If you can.
That's what you got to try, don't you?
Right.
And from an Action SA standpoint, as a coalition partner in that government, while we're watching 4 months of service delivery falling to its knees in Tshwane, we said we think that this is what we need to be doing. Our issue wasn't the fact that there was the court case. Our issue was, as a coalition partner, our perspectives on how that entire process was being managed were being totally disregarded and in total contravention of our coalition agreement. Some parties like to wrap themselves in words like coalition agreement and contraventions of statements of intent and all of that when it suits them. But we actually raised that concern through the proper structures of our coalition agreement, all the way to the national structures of the party sitting down, and we were simply being railroaded in respect of how that whole issue was handled. That's why we took issue with it.
So if you took issue with it and you think that you had a better way to handle it, why did you then keep going with a legal challenge to the unions?
It was important that there is an ongoing legal challenge, because in some situations the city has to approach the court saying, we have this obligation in terms of collective bargaining agreements, we have this obligation in terms of our constitutional duties to govern the city in a financially sustainable manner. Please, we need your help to help settle this issue. When negotiations
So have you sat them around the table?
There have been many engagements around the table.
Then does that mean that you're close to letting go of the legal case?
The legal case has been determined. It's found in favor of the city.
Okay.
But at the end of the day, what is still continued is a set of engagements with the city, which has included, negotiations around the new financial year that's just about to begin now, where the city yesterday adopted a 5% increase for its employees. And at the end of the day, that is part of a series of steps that the city of Tshwane under Dr. Nasipi Moya is taking to produce a stable labor environment in the city of Tshwane. It's very easy to poke fun at the idea of unions in our country, and quite understandably so in certain instances. But when you have 30-something thousand employees, the ability of those people to operate in a cohesive and coherent manner is a huge part about the performance of your municipality. In the city of Johannesburg, when Herman Mashaba was the mayor, he produced a first-of-its-kind memorandum of understanding between the city of Joburg, SAMWU and IMATU, the 2 unions in local government, which actually heralded an era of stability and commitments to performance agreements and other things that were vital from a governance and a service delivery point of view. And that's why these kind of relationships are very important to be dealt with in a responsible manner, and not in the manner we saw it being dealt with before we came in Tshwane.
Okay, so we spoke about the fact that it looks like the candidates are about to change quite dramatically, or the landscape is about to change. I think it's safe to say that one of the upsides to a mayor like Marrero is that it's focused the minds of many political parties that these cities need to be taken seriously. It's going to hurt them politically, whatever they do. And I think things were thrown a little bit, the cat was thrown amongst the pigeons when Helen Zille was mentioned as a potential Johannesburg mayoralty candidate, to which immediately Herman Mashaba had quite a bit to say on the matter. I'm not sure to what end, but, because surely they can put up whoever they like. Will this see Herman Mashaba put his own name in as mayoral candidate for Johannesburg?
It's a possibility. It's quite early for us to say, to be dead honest with you. We're going through a process ourselves right now. And there's two schools of thought in that regard, if I'm frank. I mean, there's no question Herman Mashaba has a track record of turning around Johannesburg that is indisputable. The evidence is there. And if you ask 10 residents of Joburg about the experience when he was mayor, the vast majority of them say things were getting better. So, there's no question that he is responsible for the era of Johannesburg where things got best the most. But from a point of view of our candidates, there's also a school of thought that's saying perhaps the answer isn't, having senior leaders of a party foisting themselves upon the people of Johannesburg. Perhaps we need to look for people who are younger, who've got the talent and the energy that they need to do this job, and to not assume that it's only people like Herman Mashaba and Helen Zille who have the capabilities of providing that kind of change in Johannesburg. I think what makes it really strange to comment upon the announcement itself is, of course, the DA is free to field any candidate they like. We live in a democracy and we welcome any candidate that they field. There's just a couple of peculiarities about that particular choice. The first is the notion that the experience of fixing Cape Town is somehow transplantable in Johannesburg. I mean, Cape Town in 2006 had been governed more by the National Party post-1994 than by the ANC. And the nature of the turnaround gig in Johannesburg is totally different. The cities could not be more different in a million years. One of the key features of which is becoming mayor of Johannesburg requires you to be able to recognize the fact that 75% of the city are people who live under the legacy of an unjust past with huge inequality, something that Helen Zille, for example, believes is imagined victimhood by virtue of her many social media posts. But I think even the bigger point beyond that, even for me, is if you look at the collapse of coalitions in Gauteng and in Johannesburg in particular, it's not even the DA that has been at the heart of those collapses. It's been Helen Zille that has been at the heart of those collapses. I received a text message from a party leader of a party that's always worked closely with the DA and coalition. And the question they posed to me when that news broke was, I wonder who's going to govern with her. Because she's become so toxic to coalitions in Gauteng, often collapsing them against the wishes of her own structures in this province, that, it doesn't matter almost how well the campaign goes. If you can't coalesce a majority around you because you repel everyone around you, then I'm not sure how that's going to help the residents of Johannesburg.
Yeah. So once again, I hear nothing about the ratepayers or the voters. I'm hearing about the problem that people in the back room would have with Helen Zille, not people who are most affected by an effective or ineffective mayor.
The last words I said in my sentence there were residents of Johannesburg. The last words of my sentence.
Yeah, well, that's if
I can't
the coalition.
say it any more recently.
What I'm saying is, do you not think it'll have an impact on voters' choice and their choices?
Well, I think certain people who buy into the narrative around the DA in Cape Town and Helen Zille, some people might be animated by that level of thinking. I think by and large, if you appreciate how campaign politics work, it will animate a group of people who I think were already quite animated in the DA. Because I think the kind of people who are animated by Helen Zille probably have been voting DA loyally for many years. What it's probably going to do is going to take a group of people who would be on the fence and otherwise might swing one way or another and alienate them when those horribly divisive and polarizing thoughts that tend to be part of the daily rhetoric come out. But, these are issues the DA has to deal with. Our issue is more about how we put forward a candidate that's going to be uniting if another candidate is being divisive, and how we could put forward someone who's going to be credible in the efforts to solve the problems in Johannesburg. And I think the great thing is we have serious options available to us in that regard, between someone like Herman Mashaba, as well as some really strong people in the city who are approaching Action SA all the time saying, can they be considered to take this forward? Because the state of Johannesburg is such that people are now coming forward to us who probably would never have come forward before or been active in party politics, but they want to put their hand up and say, we've got to fix the city.
Do you think if the ante is upped, specifically, as we said, by Action SA, perhaps by the DA, in your opinion, would or is the ANC capable of responding?
I don't know. I don't personally see too many people in those ranks in Johannesburg or in and around there that I think can really compete on that kind of level. I don't know. There's also a kind of strange attachment to the current cabal in Johannesburg. I think they have an elective conference coming up in July, which will probably be quite definitive in terms of answering that question. But at the end of the day, I mean, while I try and answer your questions and be helpful, you know, I'm much better placed to talk about Action SA in terms of what we can do, what we can bring to the party, and what we think needs to be done to fix the city of Johannesburg. And you know, the good news there is this is a party that actually has people who've been at the forefront of the most successful government in Johannesburg history. So, you know, these are people who actually have the institutional knowledge about how Johannesburg must be fixed and not another municipality.
Michael, looking at the bigger scene, because Action SA is now in Parliament, you've got 6 seats, you've been very worthy of those seats. I've got to commend the way that Action SA has made themselves be heard in Parliament. It's noticeable for anybody that's concentrating. You know, Ethel Trollip, not only him, the guys have done a hell of a job. But now we find ourselves again in the middle of what seems like a mini crisis of sorts, where the president fires a DA deputy minister. Do you think this is just the same thing that you're going through at local government level, but played out on national level, where the ANC cannot work with partners? It wants to be in charge and doesn't like to be questioned on what it does.
I think that's part of it. I'm not sure it's the full picture, but it's definitely part of it. The ANC very clearly at a national level wants to continue like nothing happened in May last year. I mean, that's as plain as day. And one of the ways that I'm astonished how they've been able to do that is through asserting executive authority, like replacing ministers, etc., while having the short-term memory loss of the fact that that executive authority only exists by virtue of a coalition now.
Yeah.
So what might have been a single party kind of a rule of executive authority before is now more like a shareholding, if you want to use the metaphor. But, you know, at the same time, we've been very critical of those parties who joined the GNU and elected a president without establishing any of these facts. Because in coalition terms, once you elect someone the president, and then you're now ministers in their government, you are subjugated to that person's authority. And if you've given them everything they want, to try and extract reforms now is pointless. I mean, you absolutely can't do that. That statement of intent that was signed was a vague, broad document that says everything and nothing at the same time.
But even if it said, to be fair, even if it said everything chapter and verse, it's trumped by the executive powers of the president.
Well, no, actually, and I tell you why. I mean, there was the ability in that document, had anyone had the forethought to do it, to actually write into that document limitations on executive authority.
Yeah, but to go to which court to enforce it?
Well, coalitions aren't about enforcement in a court of law.
But what
if
I'm
anything,
saying
they're
is
about the court of public opinion.
Yeah,
but the point is that if you do not even have a shared understanding of how these things are to be done, you have two people who believe they're absolutely right in diametrically opposing views on how the same authority is being expressed.
Yeah.
The ANC believe that the expression of presidential authority in removing a minister as they wish, etc., is 100% their story and nobody else's. The other coalition partners understandably say, but hang on, you got your president because of our support. If you want to remove a minister, you at minimum have to consult with us beforehand. But unless you actually sit down and narrow the gap in those opinions before you elect a president, it's meaningless. Because once the president is elected, that's the person who hires and fires, as you can now see. So, your bargaining chips are all gone. And I think that's the cause of real tension in this GNU. And what we are seeing, whether it's the budget debacle or whether it's this, it's just manifestations of that. Because what that coalition agreement should have also done is said, these are the changes that must take place under this government. in terms of policy, directional changes, economic changes, policy changes that are going to change the direction of our country in key regards. But again, none of that has happened. And really what you now have is, on one hand, kind of multi-party fulfillment of a failed ANC policy they all just inherited, or you just got everyone doing their own thing. I mean, I noticed yesterday, the Freedom Front announces from Washington what the terms of the agreements or the requirements of the White House are of the South African government. I mean, do we have two different international relations departments now?
We seem to have a couple.
Well,
I think you've just got stuck at two. I think you can keep going.
Well, you get the point, though. I mean, you're now adding to dysfunction, you're adding chaos. And that's not helpful.
Yeah, and it's apparent for everyone to see that it's the ultimate victim of this is the country and its citizens.
Yeah, I mean, going back to your point about that word, the citizens or the residents or the ratepayers, etc. I mean, a lot of what you're seeing with the horse trading going on, it's quite hard to see how those people are being placed at the forefront of the planning behind these kind of steps. I mean, even now, this removal of this deputy minister, I mean, you've now got the tit for tat between the different parties. They can decide who's a tit and who's a tat, but, again, this is all taking place at the expense of the country, who, by the way, are paying for the international travel that is the center of this saga.
Yes.
In a GNU cabinet, Mike, that Action SA questions in Parliament have revealed, has now spent something like over 250 million rand in the first 8 months in office. What is up with these people and traveling? I mean, this GNU government is acting like our greatest problems in the world are overseas, when, look around, they're all around us.
Yeah.
And it really is the strangest thing. And it's across the board. All the parties are doing it without regard for the public purse.
I think I've got some sympathy with them in the travel, because if you had the ability to get the hell out of here on a regular basis, wouldn't you do it as well? I mean, somebody else picking up the tab. You can go stay in a nice hotel in Tokyo, spend R1 million for a couple of nights with your wife. That's got to be nicer than sitting in Johannesburg and driving over another pothole. So I can kind of see the logic, but it's not very good for the country or its governance. Michael, I know that, it's not really your job to comment on other political parties. It's always a difficult situation when I speak to somebody within a party, but you've got a very close seat now that you're in Parliament to see that the official opposition is not, in fact, Action SA, even though you're probably behaving like the official opposition, has got, God alone knows what they're doing. I mean, we've got Jacob Zuma taking the ANC to court to be reinstated as an ANC member. Now, I couldn't help thinking what you would say if Herman Mashaba was taking the DA to court to be reinstated as a DA member while he's a leader of Action SA. Surely that would be your own lime green line or whatever it is, Yeah,
it's beyond strange. I mean, I'm going to start by the unofficial opposition comment, because I'd like to talk a little bit about Action SA in there, but with 6 seats, we are becoming an unofficial opposition.
Well, nobody else is. You're doing a great job, but nobody else is doing any job.
Well, so, exactly.
Yeah.
I actually saw a statistic the other day that Action SA's 6 members of Parliament have asked more questions than MK's 60 members of Parliament, which just demonstrates, the work that's being done by Athol Trollip and his team. But I think what's vital is that we've been seized from day one about the fact that this GNU, no matter how people might appreciate the warm and fuzzy feeling about what it avoided by way of a radical government, this GNU is 70% of the South African Parliament, and that's not healthy. That kind of power has always corrupted, and the real concern with the South African system of government is that bad habits are going to continue and accountability won't be there. And I think in many regards that concern of ours has been vindicated over time. So we've been very strong, and we've worked hard to bring accountability to the point that we've now even had to produce KPIs for this government, because they haven't told us what they really think that they're going to do, and track them on a quarterly basis, to the point that we've now presented the 1-year assessment of the GNU, and it's not a good grade. It was a grade of an E across the board, with a couple of notable exceptions, but a lot of points of failure, and from our point of view, some big concerns. But to answer the question you asked me to ask, I mean, MK is at 6s and 7s in opposition, as is the EFF. which is why the space for us to play this role, there's a vacuum that we are filling. And it is the strangest thing. There's just a revolving door of people coming and going in these parties. And you don't really get a sense that there's any coherent agenda there of any kind. At least with Action SA and other parties, if the GNU brings something to the table that's meritorious and a good, we'll support it. We lent our support to the Division of Revenue Bill yesterday, by way of an example. But these other parties are just there to undermine the ANC and to play out their own agenda with the party from which they were sprouted. So it's a strange thing, and we watch from a distance. I think people like Athol could probably give you a lot more close-up pictures of what's going on there.
Do you see yourself, your party, being joined on the opposition benches soon? Which is another nice sort of way of asking, do you think this GNU is going to last?
I don't think so. I think the DA has campaigned. I mean, if you go back to the campaign even, forget the negotiations. The DA's campaign was, rescue South Africa from the doomsday coalition of the EFF and MK, which, I mean, I'm not commenting on their campaigning, that's their message. But what it did is it created a negotiating platform where the ANC had all the chips. Because if the DA said we're going to do everything we can to stop the alternative from happening, I mean, presumably they're going to roll over and, accept almost anything in order to prevent that, which is precisely why they got hammered in the negotiations and literally got a handful of seats, far less than they should have had proportionately. It's why things like Bella, NHI, and other things just got railroaded through as if they weren't even there.
Yeah.
And I mean, you just have this dynamic. Have you ever seen like a parent with like a naughty child who's saying, if you do that one more time, and then they do it, and then if you do that one more time, it feels a little bit like that. I know there's a press conference tomorrow where they're going to be announcing their course of action, but we're not planning for the opposition benches to be crowded anytime soon.
Michael Beaumont, thank you so much for answering the questions on the range of topics. It's up to us, it's up to the voters to evaluate everybody on the work that they're doing, both local and national. I think in the last electoral cycle, both local and national, we have grown a lot closer to how our politics affect us and how we can make a difference. Believe me, it was the vote of last year that has created some of the mayhem that we're seeing now, and I'm all in favor of a little bit more mayhem. So if you are happy with the work that Action SA has done in Johannesburg, Tshwane, and especially in Parliament, could they be any worse than, sorry Mike, it's not an insult, they could be an option compared to what some of the other parties seem to be doing or not at the moment. But Michael Beaumont, thank you for always making yourself available. And to everybody that watched us, go and support Pace Car Rental, go hire a car and get a discount, and subscribe to the State of the Nation. We'll see you again. Thank you very much.
Every business needs a world-class video to show to your clients and prospective clients. When the Stream-In team isn't filming the State of the Nation, they are producing those world-class videos for companies just like yours. They have got all of the equipment, drones, microphones, whatever you need, and the technical know-how to film a proper video for your company. Visit their website.